Welcome to the November 9th, 2021 Planning Commission meeting. I'd like to ask for patience as we conduct our virtual meeting. There may be slight delays as we transition between speakers, presentations, and participants. If any participants have issues with the technology, please send a message to the moderator, Ray. We have 6 discussion items on our agenda today. Again, with a full agenda, I'd ask for a focus with each discussion to allow us to get through the entire agenda. I would ask the commissioners to hold all questions until the conclusion of all presentations and any public comments. Finally, please be recognized by the chairperson before speaking. We'll hold an introduction of our newest member later on the agenda, but I'd like to take a moment to formally welcome our newest member, Commissioner Godinez. Welcome. Moving on to public comment. We start every meeting with an opportunity for the public to comment on an item not contained on the agenda. I do not believe that we have any members of the public signed up to comment today. Moving on to consent. The consent agenda is a list of requests that can be acted upon in one motion. There is one item on the consent agenda today. Staff has completed review and has delivered the item to the Planning Commission to be deferred to another meeting. This item will return on a future agenda to be discussed fully. With that, I would ask for a motion to approve the consent agenda. Commissioner Lampman?
I'll make a motion to approve the consent agenda.
Thank you. And do we have a second? Commissioner Dautel?
Second.
Thank you. Commissioner Lampman has offered a motion to approve, and Commissioner Dautel has seconded the motion. Because this is not a final vote, I will ask for a show of hands from all who support the motion. Any opposed? Okay, the motion passes unanimously. Moving on to old business. We have 4 items on old business today. Only one of these items have been previously discussed, and we will receive staff presentations and heard from the public. For that item, I would ask for a short update from staff focusing on revisions to the request. For items appearing on old business this week, which appeared on the agenda from October 26th, but were not discussed due to time, we will hear full staff presentations and public comment. Item D1 is Z4421. This is a request to rezone approximately 31.98 acres on Battle Bridge Road from residential 4 to residential 10 conditional use. This item was on the agenda for our October 26th meeting and again was not discussed due to time. So we will start with a staff presentation from Don Belk.
Good morning. Thank you, Chair Fox. Good morning, members of the Planning Commission. This rezoning is located at 6525 Battle Bridge Road. A request to rezone about 32 acres from residential 4 to residential 10 conditional use. Your deadline for action is December 23rd. As you see, the zoning in the area is predominantly low-density residential. There is also county zoning similar to that in the vicinity. This site is located in southeast Raleigh, near and almost adjacent to the Rock Quarry Battle Bridge Activity Center, reflected here in the commercial area. And you see the prevalence of low-density residential in the vicinity. There is some moderate density residential further to the west along Rock Quarry. This site is also close to the Neuse River, and note the River Ridge Golf Course community to the east. Next slide. Just a close-up of that, again, noting the prevalence of low-density residential. This is a site perspective showing views from Battle Bridge Road looking west, additional views along Battle Bridge. And I will note here in this slide the The project would connect, if we could go back one slide, please. This in the lower right corner showing Elkton Drive looking west onto the property, which is predominantly wooded. There would be a connection to Elkton Drive. And as you see on the next slide, there would also be a connection at Dawcross Road. And also showing these apartments that are under construction along Rock Quarry Road, the Quarry Trace Apartments located to the west of the site. Next slide. Conditions have been proposed, notably limiting the number of dwelling units on the property to 200 and restricting or prohibiting several uses as noted here in condition number 3. This is a proposal for an affordable senior housing community, and this would these units would be affordable and leased to seniors at the 80% of area median income, and this would hold for a period of 40 days from the date of issuance of a certificate of occupancy. The financing for this project is under the procedures and rules of the North Carolina Housing Finance Agency. Also of note, all buildings on the property would be limited to 2 stories or no more than 40 feet in height. The density of the proposed zoning would put it just over the mark for low density residential at 6.25. The existing zoning is should note that the maximum under the existing zoning would yield 250 units. However, under the proposed zoning, and this should be 200, the proposed zoning maximum units would be 200 per the offered condition. The transportation energy analysis indicates that this site does have a lower transit score and bike score than average, and lower job proximity, higher transportation costs than average, and it does have a slightly higher walk score than average. It is served close by transit by Go Raleigh Route 18, which serves that activity center noted earlier. In terms of affordability, it does check most of the boxes there by allowing smaller units than citywide average, and it is within walking distance of transit as noted previously. Note that it has a higher demographic index than the city at large, and higher percentages in some of these other demographic categories than the city as a whole. Property is presently vacant and has been historically used for agriculture. The proposal is inconsistent with the future land use map by virtue of that it would be categorized as a moderate density residential proposal. So it is inconsistent with the flume. However, it is consistent overall with the comprehensive plan. Note there are some consistent policies, including some of the key policies denoted with the orange dot. We've noted 3 inconsistent policies, and of course, policy LU 1.2 is resulting from that flume inconsistency. I would note too that we did indicate policy LU 5.6 buffering requirements as inconsistent, but we feel that that policy can be brought to consistency with some additional buffering, particularly of the stream corridor and the distancing with the existing single-family residential. There are no outstanding issues, and again, your deadline for action on this case is December 23rd. It would require a flume amendment with your approval, and if so, it would amend the future land use map from low density to moderate density residential for this parcel. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Belk. Next, I'd like to hear from the applicant team. The applicant and all those in support have a total of 10 minutes to speak.
Thank you, Chair Fox, members of the Planning Commission. My name's Jerry Eatman. I'm a lawyer with the firm of Lynch and Eatman in Raleigh. Our address for the record is 4130 Park Lake Avenue in Raleigh. We represent East Carolina Community Development, Inc., a North Carolina nonprofit founded in 1995 for the purpose of developing affordable housing communities in North Carolina. To date, ECCDI has developed 23 such communities, 9 of which are limited to seniors age 55 and older. As indicated in the staff report, one of the conditions proposed by the applicant in this rezoning request is that the development of the property would be limited to affordable rental units for seniors age 55 and older. If we could at this time, perhaps best to focus on the proposed conditions. Don, if we could get your conditions slide up there, that'd be great. Under the current R4 zoning, as the staff noted, up to 250 units could be constructed on the property as zoned. For this reason, and based on the strong demand for affordable housing, particular affordable housing for seniors in the community, the applicant initially proposed a limit of 260 units with the idea that this would represent a relatively modest increase in density over what would be allowed under existing zoning. However, in the course of our 2 neighborhood meetings, it became clear that at least the primary concern expressed by the neighbors for this project was the proposed density. In an effort to address these concerns, the applicant ultimately decided to reduce the maximum number of rental units by nearly 25% from 260 to 200 units. This also represents a 20% reduction from the 250 units that would be permitted under the current zoning. Now, Don didn't mention this in his report, but it is in his written staff report. By reducing the maximum number of units to 200, the applicant has also made a substantial effort at mitigating the inconsistency with the future land use map with respect to density. At 200 unit maximum, this request has a density of 6.25 units per acre, which is very close to the low density threshold envisioned by the future land use map. This proposed rezoning and this density would also provide a transition of density consistent with the city's land use policies from the lower density residential neighborhoods adjoining the site to the mixed use activity center and moderate density residential designated areas to the south of the site. One of the other concerns that was expressed at our neighborhood meetings was the concern that we would have high-rise apartment buildings here. In an effort to address that concern, we also added a condition that would limit the height of any buildings to 2 stories or 40 feet. It's actually the intent of the applicant here to build single-story, 200 single-story apartment type units for seniors which have an appearance of single-family residential units. The last thing I would note about the concerns we had from the neighbors is the issue of enforcing the affordability and age requirements. This is a deed restricted project, so the affordability requirements, which are up to 80%, It may in fact be lower. The income level may be lower. It's an up to 80% of no more than adjusted median income. Those requirements would be included in the deed restriction. It is a 40-year deed restriction, and it's intended to be enforced in that manner. I'd like to reserve whatever time I have left to address any questions that might come up from the public or the staff. I would like to say that I do believe this proposal is consistent with the comprehensive plan by expanding the supply of housing options, particularly the option for affordable housing for seniors, which is a pretty desperate need in the community right now. We'd appreciate your favorable recommendation. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Eatman. Just want to verify with the moderator, do we have any members of the public signed up to speak today on this item?
We do not.
Okay. Then I'll shift to allow for questions and comments from the commissioners. Do any members have any questions or comments? If so, please be recognized to speak. Commissioner Lampman.
This is a question for staff. I was just kind of looking at the surrounding areas and I see Dalcross Road. Is that intended to be an extended road, or what is the city kind of expecting from the applicant in terms of developing out the site?
Yes, Commissioner Lampman, it is my understanding that both Dalcross and Elkton would be connected. However, further details on the connectivity requirements, I believe we do have some transportation planning staff on hand. But that is my understanding, that both of those streets would be connected through.
Did we want to allow transportation staff to follow
Yes,
up on that?
can everybody hear me? I'm sorry, I didn't get a chance to do a mic check. This is Jason Myers in Transportation. I was waiting to be unmuted by the moderator.
Good
Don
morning.
is correct that that we have street stub standards that require the extension of public streets into sites like these to help create a connected street grid and a little bit more resilient and walkable system. Is there a specific question about one of these stubs that I can answer for the commission?
No, I was just, thank you for that question, but I was just, I know that, income restricted housing is very difficult to, as it is to get it to work economically. And so I just kind of think about some of the pressures that are put on the development when we do ask for extension of roads to be paid for by the applicant. And so I just am wanting to understand what the expectation is of the applicant for those roads.
Thank you for that question. Commissioner Rains, I saw you had your hand raised as well.
Thanks, Chair Fox. I just had a question for the applicant. If they can go into more detail about the 80% AMI deed restriction. I think that's a great restriction for 40 years. I just want to know how that works and where the 80% came from versus less years at a lower AMI. If you could talk about that.
Thank you. This is a tax credit program, and the AMI is set by Housing and Urban Development. It's the adjusted median income for this particular area. We use the restriction of up to 80% because that is the sort of the threshold for affordability. Depending on the actual project that we developed and the particular product that we do, it may be as low as 60% of AMI for a particular. And right now, the projections that we're running are that this one will be a 60% reduction, but 80% is the most. And so we usually use that restriction to give us flexibility within the Section 42 program.
Great, thank you.
Yes, sir.
Are there any additional questions or comments? Commissioner Bennett?
Thank you, Chair Fox. I'd just like to thank the applicant for working with the community to attempt to address their concerns. This sounds like a great project. It definitely is fitting a need and something I talk about a lot. I also appreciated that the applicant included the minutes from the neighborhood meetings. We don't always get the full minutes. Sometimes it's just very short, cryptic bullet points, and it's difficult to fully understand the concerns that were expressed. So I appreciate having the full minutes so we could understand exactly what was said and how you attempted to address that. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Commissioner Bennett. I want to concur with that statement as well. Those minutes were very helpful in reviewing this case. Are there any additional questions or comments from commissioners? Commissioner Lampman and then Commissioner Dato.
I was just going to express a general opinion that I really like the idea of the product type out here as well. I typically kind of call them senior cottages, but the single floor, it's easier for people who are 55 and older, not having stairs. But also it provides a home-like environment, and I just really love it. So I'm excited.
Thank you for your comments. Commissioner Dato.
Thanks, Chair Fox. I just had a quick question about, I believe in the staff presentation, there was a comment about potentially adding some buffering either along the, I believe there's like a creek possibly running through the site and also maybe between housing. I'm curious if the applicant has any desire to add any conditions regarding to buffering.
Yes, if I can address that issue. We have not had a chance to lay the units out on the property yet. We fully anticipate that we'll have some additional buffering, both against the creek, the greenway area, the creek area, and the single-family residential to the north and west of the site. It's just that we have not had a chance to get the engineers out there to actually lay those units out on the property yet. So we haven't had an opportunity to propose actual buffers. We have every reason to believe in the site planning process that would take place. We are prepared to do that.
Am I hearing from the applicant an interest in additional time, or you're going to proceed and provide buffering during site plan review?
Well, we would like to be able to do it during site plan review, if that's possible. If it is the decision of the commission that needs to be provided at this stage, we are willing to request additional time to try to work out some buffering as part of a condition. Again, ideally we do that during site planning, but we're willing to do it now if necessary. Thank
you for that.
Yes, ma'am.
I'll do a quick poll of the commission. That was a question I was going to ask as well, Commissioner Dautel, after reading the staff report. However, with the reduction in the overall unit, so essentially almost a downzoning, it became less of an issue for me, but just want to do a quick temperature check of the rest of the commission. If there's a desire to hold this for additional buffering requirements, just raise your hand or give me a thumbs up. Okay, seeing none, it looks like we might be comfortable with the case as it currently stands with the reduction in units. So I'd like to entertain a motion. Please remember to be recognized before you make the motion, and the motion should cite comprehensive plan consistency and include a statement of why the request is reasonable and in the public interest. Commissioner Bennett.
Thank you. I move to recommend adoption of the proposed consistency statement dated October 26, 2021, contained in the agenda materials, and to recommend approval of the zoning amendment. The action is reasonable and in the public interest because the proposal would add to the affordable housing supply for a growing senior population. An additional residential development in this area is appropriate adjacent to a mixed-use activity center. This recommendation also includes an amendment to the future land use map to the extent described in the adopted consistency statement.
Thank you, Commissioner Bennett. We've heard a motion from Commissioner Bennett, and do we have a second? Commissioner Lampman?
Second.
Is there any additional discussion or debate on the merits of the motion? Seeing none, I will ask Shanita for a roll call of members to record their individual votes. At the end of the roll call, I will announce the outcome of the vote.
Commissioner Bennett, how do you vote?
Aye.
Commissioner Dartell,
Aye.
Chair Fox,
Aye.
Commissioner Godinez,
Aye.
Commissioner Lampman,
Aye.
Vice Chair Mann,
Aye.
Commissioner Raines.
Aye.
The motion passes unanimously. Moving on to item D.2, which is case number Z4921. This is a request to rezone over 209 acres on Kyle Drive and Buffalo Road from a mix of uses with partial special highway overlay District 1, as noted in the backup materials, to CX3 conditional use with special highway overlay District 1 on part, residential mixed use 4 with conditional use with special highway overlay District 1 on part, and R10 conditional use. This case was discussed at the October 26th Planning Commission meeting, where it was deferred to allow the applicant to address concerns about compatibility, transitions, certain use limitations, stormwater impacts, and the amount of open space. I'd like to ask for a staff update from John Anagnost.
Good morning, Chair Fox and members of the commission. There we go. I'll just go through a couple slides to remind you of the nature of the site and the request. So here we can see the existing zoning districts, kind of an odd mix in geometry of those districts. We can skip ahead 2 slides. Again, so here's the site, just to refresh your memory. So pretty much completely wooded. There's the Neuse River on the east side with a fairly large riparian area extending from that into the site, and then bordering the site residential development of a range of densities. Next slide, please. And let's go ahead 2 more slides, please. And so you can see the site from Buffalo Road. Let's skip ahead to this slide. We can see the street plan recommendations for this area. So development of this site would lead to construction of an extension of Buffalo Road and Spring Forest Road, creating a new intersection and facilitating future connectivity. Next slide, please. This is the exhibit of the proposed districts. They're much simpler and more rectilinear than the existing districts. I do want to note a new zoning condition that has been offered for this meeting that is indicated by the green line along the southern boundary of the property. So that is a 200-foot setback that's required for the apartment building type. And so that's just to help you see where that applies. The zoning condition itself is a reference, a lot of Book of Maps references. So that's where that would apply. Next slide, please. And so on those revised conditions, the first 3 conditions that you see on this slide are the existing conditions. So I will note condition number 3 has additional uses prohibited. That includes bars and gas stations are now prohibited by the most recently offered conditions. Number 4 is a new condition, that 200-foot setback for apartment and townhouses, just noted on the exhibit. Next slide, please. And then 3 additional new conditions, one of which requires a multi-use path from the Greenway Trail on the Neuse River to the extension of Buffalo Road as it passes north through Code Creek Road, and then a fence along the boundary of the commercial mixed-use district where it is adjacent to the office mixed-use district to the south that is currently being constructed with townhomes, and then a setback requirement for the restaurant use in that same commercial mixed-use district. And if we could advance to the policy consistency slides, we will see that, and one more, please. So the request is overall consistent with the future land use map and the urban form map. There's a parkway designation on 540 that the special highway overlay district is consistent with. And then a number of these policies that you see here have moved from inconsistent to consistent due to the setbacks that have been offered through the zoning condition and the multi-use path connecting to the Greenway Trail. Next slide, please. So fewer inconsistent policies than what you saw last time. And next slide. And so your deadline for a recommendation is December the 25th.
Thank you, Mr. Anagnost. We've already heard from the applicant team. The applicant team is available for questions should we have them. I'd like to quickly verify with the moderator there are no members of the public wishing to speak on this item.
I don't have any.
Thank you. So now we can move to questions or comments from commissioners. Do any members have any questions or comments? If so, please be recognized to speak. Commissioner Bennett?
Thank you. At the last meeting, John, I believe I asked you about the comment in the staff report that the proposed rezoning posed significant potential impacts that were not, I think the way I asked the question is, did the existing zoning pose the same significant impacts? And I seem to recall that the response was no. So now with the updated conditions, does that mitigate those significant impacts that were the concern in the staff report previously?
I think the new conditions have gone a long way, certainly in terms of the proximity to the residential neighborhoods to the south that are adjacent to the residential 10 district. I think the setback for apartments and townhouses replicates a lot of the intent of the existing conditions that either limited density or limited building types unless there was a buffer area in many of those locations. So I think that is replicating the intent there. And then the further restriction of allowed uses in the CX district, the setback and the fence requirement also do a lot to help with the compatibility with the adjacent development. So yes, I think this is an improvement.
Okay, what about stormwater?
The applicant has not offered additional conditions related to stormwater controls. And so that is really going to rely on the existing UDO standards, which, to be fair, is what the current zoning also relies on. But the UDO standards do require stormwater quantity and quality controls, as well as the floodplain regulations that were recently approved by the city council. So fairly good protection there, but yeah, there is an area where the greenway easement is pretty narrow along the Neuse River. I did note that.
Okay, thank you.
Are there any additional questions or comments from commissioners? Seeing none, I would like to entertain a motion. Again, please remember to be recognized before you make the motion, and the motion should cite comprehensive plan consistency and include a statement of why the request is reasonable and in the public interest. Commissioner Dautel?
Thanks, Chair Fox. I would like to move to adopt the proposed consistency statement dated November 9th, 2021, contained in the agenda materials, and to recommend approval of the zoning amendment. This action is reasonable in the public interest because it would allow for additional housing supply and more opportunities for shopping, services, or employment in an urbanized area.
Thank you. And do we have a second? Commissioner Bennett?
Second.
Commissioner Dautel has offered a motion to approve Z 4921. Commissioner Bennett has given a second. Is there any additional discussion or debate on the merits of the motion? Seeing none, I will ask Shanita for a roll call of members to record their individual votes. And at the end of the roll call, I will announce the outcome of the vote.
Commissioner Bennett, how do you vote?
Aye.
Commissioner Dautel?
Aye.
Chair Fox?
Aye.
Commissioner Godinez?
Aye.
Commissioner Lampman?
Aye.
Vice Chairman?
Aye.
Commissioner Raines.
Aye.
The motion passes unanimously. Moving on to item D.3, case number Z5521. This is a request to rezone approximately 4.04 acres at the intersection of Forestville Road and Taylor Oaks Drive from residential 4 to residential 6 conditional use. This item appeared on the agenda for our October 26th meeting, but was not discussed due to time constraints. So I'd like to start with a staff presentation from Jason Harden.
Good morning. So thanks for the introduction for this rezoning request. It's adjacent to, and the map will come up in just a moment, a little node of commercial or mixed use activity along Mitchell Mill Road. So it's currently zoned R4 and it's adjacent to some mixed use zoning, which we'll see in just a moment. So there you go. You can see to the north, that's Mitchell Mill Road. Again, the request from R4 to R6 with conditions. Let's go ahead to the next slide, please. So you can see immediately adjacent to some commercial mixed use zoning. There's also, again, along Mitchell Mill Road, some office mixed use, neighborhood mixed use. Then to the south, it transitions to residential zoning. You can see adjacent to the subject area, some R6 zoning and R4. So generally residential there away from Mitchell Mill Road. Next slide. A little bit of a view of what that looks like on the ground. So there's some restaurants, retail, some other commercial uses in the area, really centered on that intersection of Forestville and Mitchell Mill Road. Next slide. A couple of views of the site. It's currently largely, not entirely, but largely wooded. There's in the top right, you can see a couple of structures, one detached house on the site. The rest is wooded. And again, a couple different views from Forestville and Taylor Oaks Road. Next slide, please. So just two conditions. One is prohibition on the apartment building type, which currently in R6 is permitted in the form of a conservation development. And then a limitation on the number of total units to no more than 25. So R6 would permit the townhouse building type. Next slide. Comparison of existing and proposed. So actually the rezoning, given that condition regarding the total number of units, would, depending on what building types were used, reduce the number of units that are possible on the site. So presently, on that maximum units row, you could see 15 units if detached house, but due to the recent text change, would allow 30 duplex units. So the proposed zoning, again, if detached were the only building type, would allow more, but if duplex were pursued, it would actually allow fewer units, would adjust the setbacks somewhat, reflecting the different setbacks for the townhouse building type and then R6. Would not permit any commercial uses. Next slide. In terms of the carbon emission analysis, as we see sometimes in these areas further away from larger centers of activity, a mixed result. So a lower walk score than average, although there is something of an existing node there that allowing more housing nearby would tend to strengthen, would tend to support some additional businesses in that area. But a pretty low walk score, no transit service. On the other hand, the reason why it's a mixed analysis is it would allow more energy efficient building types that currently would be illegal to build. So townhouses, more energy efficient than detached houses. So that's why a little bit of a mix here, but in some respects would improve carbon emissions. Next slide. In terms of affordability, again, a little bit mixed, given that in a way it would add more flexibility in terms of building types, but again, in another way might reduce the total number of units possible, which is not good for affordability. Doesn't include any, unlike the request we saw earlier, doesn't include any specifically subsidized units, does permit a variety of housing types and smaller lots than the city average. Again, not served by transit, so no benefit from that perspective. The request in terms of the future land use map, the designation there is low density residential. It's clearly consistent with that category. Next slide. There's no urban form designation, although again, you can see just to the north, that area is designated as a mixed use center, indicating that there is a desire to see that evolve into more of a walkable center over time. Next slide. In terms of consistent policies, consistent with the future land use map, does permit more housing variety than the current zoning, facilitates infill development by allowing some additional housing types. Again, talked about the mixed results from the carbon analysis, but generally allowing those building types are a huge factor in carbon emissions, and so it does allow more energy efficient building types. Next slide. One inconsistent policy, and it ties to the fact that, well, two elements of the conditions. One, that it caps the number of units lower than what could be built now, and that it excludes the apartment building type, which again would be permitted in R6 in a conservation district. So limiting housing choice in terms of building types. So inconsistent with that policy. Next slide. Overall, though, consistent with the future land use map, several key policies, and consistent in the grand scheme of things. Next slide. So no outstanding issues and deadline for action later this month. Happy to take questions if there are any.
Thank you, Mr. Harden. Next, I'd like to hear from the applicant team. The applicant and all those in support have a total of 10 minutes to speak.
Thank you, Chair Fox and Commissioners. This is Molly Stewart, Morningstar Law Group. I also have with me today Steve Gannon, representing the property owner, who is also the applicant for this request. While we're getting the slides up, I'll just share a little bit about the neighborhood meeting that we held. We had 4 attendees, and while there was little discussion, it was a fairly short meeting. The questions that we did have were generally regarding interest in the new housing availability in the area, including price points and interior layouts, those kinds of details. We heard no opposition in that meeting. Next slide, please. This slide shows the Wake Crossroads area plan. It shows that the property is, although included in the boundary of that plan, it doesn't come with any particular guidance coming out of the plan. But it does show that this site is well located. It's adjacent to an intended small mixed-use center to include services. Bringing residents to this area can help support both those existing and future businesses in the area. Currently, at and nearby this intersection, there's a restaurant, there are a couple of churches, convenience store, and gas station. Next slide, please. So with our R6 zoning request and our intended zoning conditions limiting the apartment buildings and the number of units, this site is proposing to take on that function of stepping down from that mixed-use center to the surrounding single-family neighborhood. We are available for your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Stewart. There are no members of the public signed up to speak on this request, so I'd like to allow for questions and comments from commissioners. Do any members have any questions or comments? Seeing none, I'd like to entertain a motion. Commissioner Lampman?
I'd like to make a motion to recommend approval. I move to recommend adoption of the proposed consistency statement dated November 9th, 2021, contained in the agenda materials, and to recommend approval for the zoning amendment. Zoning case number Z5521, Forestville and Taylor Oaks, addresses 3535 and 3537 Forestville Road. After considering the policies and other materials included as part of the comprehensive plan, the Planning Commission determines that the proposed zoning amendment is consistent with the comprehensive plan and other adopted plans and consistent with the future land use map, and the request should be approved. The action taken is reasonable and in the public interest because the request, by facilitating the development of townhome building types, would provide needed additional housing choice and variety to the area. The request would also allow fewer housing units than existing zoning, although more if it would be built only as detached houses. Compared to the latter scenarios, it would facilitate more housing in the location into a mixed use area around the intersection of Mitchell Mill and Forestville Roads. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Lightman. Do we have a second? Commissioner Rains?
Second?
Thank you. Commissioner Lightman has offered a motion for approval of Z5521. Commissioner Rains has offered a second. Is there any additional discussion or debate on the merits of the motion? Seeing none, I will ask Shanitha for a roll call of members. At the end of the roll call, I will announce the outcome of the vote.
Commissioner Bennett, how do you vote?
Aye.
Commissioner Dautell,
Aye.
Chair Fox,
Aye.
Commissioner Godinez,
Aye.
Commissioner Lampman,
Aye.
Vice Chairman,
Aye.
Commissioner Rains.
Aye.
The motion passes unanimously. Moving on to item D.4, which is case number TCZ 421. This is a request to change the zoning conditions for approximately 6.99 acres located near the intersection of ACC Boulevard and TW Alexander Drive. The property is zoned commercial mixed use 7 stories with zoning conditions. This item appeared on the agenda for our October 26, 2021 meeting, but was not discussed due to time constraints. So I'd like to start with a staff presentation from Carmen Kwan.
Good morning, Planning Commissioners. Thanks, Matt. So this is a request for a text change to zoning conditions located at 8001 ACC Boulevard. The request is to amend some existing conditions associated with a past rezoning case B3716. The site includes one parcel measuring at 6.99 acres, and the Planning Commission deadline for action is December 25th, 2021. Next slide, please. Zoning in the area is predominantly planned development. There is commercial mixed-use zoning districts that are located south of the site, south of TW Alexander Drive, closer towards the Briar Creek area. Next slide, please. Some of the surrounding land uses are commercial, medical offices, and residential. I do want to note that this site is on the border of the City of Raleigh's planning jurisdiction with the City of Durham. Next slide, please. Looking south towards Glenwood Avenue, the new multifamily residential within the City of Raleigh's jurisdiction is catty corner to the rezoning site. Across the street is the emergency room, and then in the top right corner, you'll see Glenwood Avenue. In the City of Durham's jurisdiction, there is a grocery store just down the street, and there is a bus stop located directly in front of the rezoning site. Next slide, please. So if you are standing on TW Alexander Drive and headed eastbound, you'll see that the site is heavily wooded at this moment. And then if you're standing in the center of the intersection of ACC Boulevard and TW Alexander Drive, you'll note that there is a street stub that borders the eastern boundary of the site leading up to the City of the edge of the city of Raleigh. Next slide, please. So once again, if you're in the middle of the intersection, there is a street stub if you're headed north on ACC Boulevard. And then if you're looking south on ACC Boulevard, the proximity of the new multifamily residential and the emergency room is to be noted. If you are standing in front of the site on TW Alexander Drive, you'll see there is a bus stop there with no existing bus amenities. And then you'll see its proximity to, the bus stop's proximity to the existing residential and the site. Next slide, please. So the proposed conditions will prohibit an adult establishment on the site. It also adds a residential use, so up to 350 dwelling units, and it also adds up to 40,000 square feet of commercial uses. It also specifies an existing condition by noting that a pedestrian entrance specifically needs to face ACC Boulevard should the site be developed. Next slide, please. So the change in entitlement is that residential uses will be added up to 350 dwelling units, and then also retail uses will be a permitted use at the site up to 40,000 square feet. Next slide, please. Transportation and energy analysis. There is a higher walk score than the city's average for the site, and there is also a higher transportation cost index than the city's average, and this is indicative that the site has more access to multimodal transportation than the city average. There is a lower bike score and a lower transit score than city average, and a lower job proximity score than the city's average at this site. Next slide, please. The site, so the bus stop that I noted directly in front of the site is served by the Durham Route 2, and this is connecting the City of Durham transit station to the Briar Creek area. Next slide, please. There is, because this request is adding a residential use, it does add to the housing supply. It also enhances the variety of housing types that would be permitted at the site, and the site is within walking distance to transit. Next slide, please. It does not include subsidized units. Next slide, please. And then this site is also has a lower person of color population. It's more, the site also has a higher income population than the city of Raleigh. It is less linguistically isolated, so people are more likely to be able to speak English than the city of Raleigh as a whole. There is also less of a population with lower than a high school education, so I guess you could say that it is more well educated in this area. It does skew younger, so population under the age of 5, and then the population of over the age of 64 is less than the city of Raleigh as a whole. Next slide, please. The site is currently vacant, and existing conditions do not currently allow residential uses. The proposed conditions would change this by allowing residential to be built at the site. Next slide, please. I will note that the request is inconsistent with the future land use map, which is currently designating the site as office and residential mixed use. Next slide, please. The zoning conditions that are offered are consistent with the urban form designation of the City Growth Center. Next slide, please. And overall, this request is consistent with the comprehensive plan, although it is inconsistent with the future land use map. Next slide, please. Some of the consistent policies are LE 2.6, 6.1, 6.2, and 7.6. Next slide, please. And the only inconsistent policy for this request is that it is inconsistent with the future land use map designation. Next slide, please. Whoops. Can you go back to the previous slide, please? I wanted to note that the approval of this request would amend the future land use map to community mixed use to align with the existing zoning district. Yep. Next slide, please. That's it. Once again, your deadline for action is December 25th, 2021.
Thank you, Ms. Kwan. Next, I'd like to hear from the applicant team. The applicant and those in support have a total of 10 minutes to speak.
Good morning, Chair Fox and members of the Planning Commission. This is Worth Mills with Longleaf Law Partners, 4509 Creedmoor Road, Suite 302, Raleigh, NC 27612. On behalf of the applicant, I believe we have a presentation as well. If we could pull that up, please. And if we could go to the second slide. So again, as Carmen laid out, this is a text change to zoning conditions that would allow residential and retail uses at 8001 ACC Boulevard to facilitate a mixed-use development within a city growth center. The property is just under 7 acres. It's located at the northwest quadrant of the TW Alexander Drive and ACC Boulevard intersection, just east of a Harris Teeter shopping center and within close proximity to RDU. As Carmen mentioned, most of the property to the west and to the north is within Durham's jurisdiction. Next slide, please. So the property is currently zoned CX7 conditional use pursuant to a rezoning case Z3716. The surrounding area that falls within Raleigh's planning jurisdiction is predominantly mixed use or PD zoning. And I'll note as well that across ACC Boulevard to our east is an active development plan for 223 new apartment units with case name ASR 4521. Next slide, please. So this is the set of current conditions in place today. Current conditions allow for one of two development scenarios, either 46,200 square feet of office, or in the alternative, a 165 unit hotel. Other conditions include a build-to range of width to mirror parking limited frontage, maximum parking between any building and ACC Boulevard, and dedication of a transit easement to the city. Next slide, please. So as mentioned, the applicant wishes to expand the allowable types of development to create a true mixed-use development. We've added a prohibition that would prohibit adult establishments on the use, and we've included a new development option of 350 dwelling units and 40,000 square feet of commercial services. The plan is for ground floor retail space with apartments above, with space for public terraces, as well as work from home pods as well. The remaining conditions have not changed. Next slide, please. And although the rezoning request is inconsistent with the future land use map today, it is consistent with two key City of Raleigh policy maps. First, it's consistent with the urban form map. The property is within the Briar Creek City Growth Center, where significant infill and redevelopment are intended. These city growth centers need a variety of uses to be successful and to reach their potential. And this text change would offer the wider variety of uses to do just that. As I mentioned, it would permit up to 350 residences within walking distance of an existing shopping center, while also permitting more retail uses. Next slide, please. Second, the text change is consistent with the city's economic development priority area map. And again, allowing a wider variety of uses increases the economic viability of this property and of the surrounding area. And to summarize, again, this text change to zoning conditions would increase the allowable uses on the site while retaining those previously conditions agreed to from Z3716. The request is consistent with the 2030 comprehensive plan, the urban form map, and it is compatible with the surrounding area, both in existing and future development. And for those reasons, we ask that you recommend approval this morning. I'm available to answer any questions if you have them. Thank you.
Thank you. I just want to verify with the moderator that we do not have any members of the public.
Correct. We have none.
Okay. Moving on, I'd like to allow now for questions and comments from commissioners. Do any members have any questions or comments? Commissioner Lampman?
I think overall, it makes sense for this area. I just didn't know if staff had done any research or as part of the commentary, just to give a little insight into Durham zoning in the area. It looks like they're developing out quite a lot around it as well in their area.
I had not. A nearby townhome was developed in the 2010s, so I had not investigated too deeply into some of the ongoing development patterns just over the city of Raleigh border with Durham.
And then I guess just kind of in general, any sort of since it still has, it's still a lot fairly wooded, are there any tree conservation or anything that would be going on there as well?
Yes, Ms. Lampman, this is Ward. So we would be required to comply with tree conservation standards under Article 9.1. And to the Durham question, I haven't done as much research on that either, but I think it is important to note that the existing Harris Teeter Shopping Center, which is within walking distance, is within Durham's planning jurisdiction. So they've contemplated some level of commercial services out here as well.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Are there any additional questions or comments from commissioners? Seeing none, I'd like to entertain a motion. Commissioner Rains?
Thanks, Chair Fox. This allows more uses mixed with residential, which supports the comp plan. So I move to recommend adoption of the proposed consistency statement dated November 9th, 2021, contained in the agenda materials, and to recommend approval of the zoning amendment. This recommendation also includes an amendment to the future land use map to the extent described in the adopted consistency statement. For case TCZ 421, the action taken is reasonable and in the public interest because it increases the housing supply in the area, enables development of a constrained and underutilized site, and adds retail and commercial services.
Thank you. And do we have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Commissioner Rain. Commissioner Rains has offered a motion to approve TCZ 421, and Vice Chair Mann has offered a second. Is there any additional discussion or debate on the merits of the motion? Seeing none, I will ask Shanitha for a roll call of members. At the end of the vote, I will announce the outcome.
Commissioner Bennett, how do you vote?
Aye.
Commissioner Dartell?
Aye.
Commissioner Elder?
Aye.
Chair Fox?
Aye.
Commissioner Godinez?
Aye.
Commissioner Lampman?
Aye.
Vice Chair Mann?
Aye.
Commissioner Rains?
Aye.
The motion passes unanimously. Moving on to the new business portion of the agenda, item E.1 is case number Z3021. This is a request to rezone approximately 2.45 acres on Creedmoor Road from residential 4 to commercial mixed use 3 stories parking limited conditional use. This item has not been previously discussed. I'd like to ask for a staff presentation from Hannah Reckow.
Good morning. So this is a request to rezone one parcel, 5904 Creedmoor Road, from R4 to CX3 PLCU. Next slide. You can see the surrounding area is a mix of residential R4 zoning and mixed use zoning, particularly along Creedmoor Road. Next slide. See the general location. This is north of Crabtree Valley Mall. You see the site on the eastern side of Creedmoor Road. There are primarily residential uses, neighborhoods to the east and west, but then commercial uses and office uses along Creedmoor Road itself. And then pretty close by to the northwest is Jeffrey Grove Elementary School. And then I've also outlined a previous case you heard in the last year, Z4620, which was also along this portion of Creedmoor Road. Next slide. A zoom in to this site, you can see it is largely forested, has frontage along Creedmoor Road near the intersection with Jeffrey Grove School Road, and then it backs up to the neighborhood along Bramblewood Drive. Next slide. Here's some views of the site from the street. You can see the frontage looking north and south on Creedmoor Road. Next slide. And there are 5 zoning conditions that are proposed. The first prohibits a number of uses that are normally permitted in commercial mixed use. The second limits the total area of office and medical use to 35,000 square feet. And then the third limits household living uses to just multi-unit living and no more than 125 units. Fourth condition applies some standards to any retail sales that would be located on the site. Being located in a multi-tenant building, no more than 15% of the total area or 4,000 square feet, whichever is larger, and then hours of operation and prohibiting drive-through and drive-in. These are very similar to the limited use standards that apply in an office mixed-use district. And then the last condition requires full cutoff light fixtures in parking and pedestrian areas. Next slide. So really the change in entitlement here is a significant increase in number of potential units, and then adding a number of non-residential units, non-residential uses rather. All of these are capped by the zoning conditions that you just saw. Next slide. So the subdivision site is in an area that has a similar walk score and transit score to the city as a whole, but a lower bike score for lack of infrastructure in the area, average proximity to jobs, and a little higher low cost index than the city overall. There is bus service along Creedmoor Road and a site within walking distance. It's Route 36 with 30-minute service. Next slide. And the request would add potential units to the site. None of these would be guaranteed to be subsidized. It would increase the variety of housing types, smaller units, and within walking distance of transit. Demographic analysis of the area shows a lower percentage of color, low income households and populations with less than high school education as compared to the city overall. And there are some historical covenants restricting development beyond UDO requirements for the nearby neighborhoods, and no mutually exclusive covenants were found. Next slide. So the site is designated as office and residential mixed use on the future land use map. Commercial mixed use is not typically consistent with that request. However, those conditions prohibit uses and apply standards to retail uses such that the request, this particular district is consistent with that designation. Next slide. There's no urban form guidance for the site. Next slide. And the request is consistent overall with the comprehensive plan. Next slide. You see a list of consistent policies, which include those regarding compact development, reinforcing the urban pattern, particularly along Creedmoor Road, and then prohibiting out or curbing impacts from more impactful commercial uses, potential development impacts of new commercial uses, and the scale of new commercial uses. And then no inconsistent policies were identified in this analysis. So there are no outstanding issues. The deadline for action is December 13th. I'm happy to answer any questions. Yeah.
Thank you, Ms. Recco. Next, I'd like to hear from the applicant team. The applicant and those in support have a total of 10 minutes to speak.
Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the Planning Commission. Chad Essick with Porter Sproul, 301 Fayetteville Street, Suite 1900, Raleigh, 27602. Here this morning on behalf of the applicant. Hannah's done a nice job reviewing the request, so I'll try not to be too redundant. But looking, next slide, please. Again, this is a 2.5 acre site, currently zoned R4, located at 5904 Creedmoor Road. You'll see on the aerial, well, currently there's a single family home located on the site. Creedmoor Road is a 4-lane divided highway and designated as 6-lane divided on the Raleigh street map. This site is north of Millbrook Road, but south of Lynn Road. The Mariners Creek apartments to the southwest. You have a couple office parks to the north and south. Across Creedmoor Road is an existing animal hospital. And then you have the Valley Estates neighborhood to the east and Jeffries Grove Elementary School northeast of this site. Next slide, please. As Hannah noted, the site is currently zoned R4. There's not much of that remaining along Creedmoor Road, mainly mixed use zoning. You'll see you have commercial mixed use both to the north and the south, as well as office mixed use with those story height limits being in the 3-story range, which this is what this proposal is requesting. While, as Hannah mentioned, there is no urban form designation for this site, we have proposed the PL frontage in order to pull the buildings closer to Creedmoor Creedmoor Road and further away from the existing residential to the east. Next slide. As Hannah noted, there's a number of uses that have been prohibited that would otherwise be allowed in the CX district. We've placed caps on square feet for the office as well as the residential dwelling units and have, next slide, please. And we have also incorporated a lot of the OX standards for retail as far as hours of operation, no drive-through facilities, and that sort of thing. We did have 2 neighborhood meetings on this rezoning case. At the first one, we had a handful of folks attend. Most of the questions were around UDO requirements for stormwater, as well as neighborhood transitions, and we provided that information. The second meeting, there was just a couple folks there. I've not received any communication since the notices went out about anyone expressing any opposition to the case, and it's my understanding there's no one signed up to speak today in opposition. Again, staff has deemed it consistent with the future land use map, the comprehensive plan overall, and has not identified any inconsistent policies associated with the request. So I'm happy to answer any questions, but we would respectfully ask that the Planning Commission recommend approval of the rezoning. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. And again, there are no members of the public signed up to speak on this item. So I'd like to shift for questions and comments from commissioners. Do any members have any questions or comments? Seeing none, I'd like to entertain a motion. Commissioner Bennett?
Sorry, I couldn't get myself unmuted. Let me pull it up here. Who was it? You guys are making me work today. I move to recommend adoption of the proposed consistency statement dated November 9th, 2021, contained in the agenda materials, and to recommend approval of the zoning amendment. the action taken is reasonable and in the public interest because the request would increase residential and commercial entitlement on a property along a major transportation corridor.
Thank you, Commissioner Bennett. And do we have a second? Commissioner Dattel?
Second.
Commissioner Bennett has offered a motion for approval of Z 3021. Commissioner Dattel has offered a second. Is there any additional discussion or debate on the merits of the motion? Seeing none, I will ask Shanitha for a roll call of members. At the end of the roll call, I will announce the outcome of the vote.
Commissioner Bennett, how do you vote?
Aye.
Commissioner Dartell,
Aye.
Commissioner Elder,
Aye.
Chair Fox,
Aye.
Commissioner Godinez,
Aye.
Commissioner Lampman,
Aye.
Vice Chairman,
Aye.
and Commissioner Raines.
Aye.
The motion passes unanimously. Moving on to item E.2, case number TC 1421. This is a citizen-initiated petition to amend Part 10 of the Unified Development Ordinance to modify the use standards for breweries, wineries, distilleries, and cideries. Adoption of TC 1421 would expand the districts where these uses are allowed by adding it as a limited use in the commercial mixed-use district. This item has not been previously discussed. I'd like to start with a staff presentation from Justin Booker.
Very much, and thank you very much, and good morning, everyone. Thank you for the introduction. You can go ahead and go to the next slide. So just a quick overview. This application was filed May 13th. The text change was authorized by Council August 17th. And again, the proposed modifications are to the existing regulations for breweries, wineries, distilleries, and cideries, and to expand where those uses would be allowed. Next slide, please. So here you can see the existing regulations, use standards for brewery, winery, and distilleries. You can see the absence of cideries there in the header. That is one of the cleanup items we have proposed in this draft ordinance, as cideries is included within the permitted use table, but not within the use standard shown here. But you can see the use is permitted by right within the industrial mixed use and heavy industrial zoning districts, and it is a limited use within the downtown mixed use district. You can see that the two standards shown here prevent off-site distribution and outdoor storage associated with production. Next slide, please. Staff performed a lot of peer city research to look into how this use is regulated in adjacent municipalities. So we looked at 7 municipalities and really came down to a pretty concrete definition of what constitutes a microbrewery. So one that produces less than 15,000 US beer barrels a year. We did find some municipalities had no production size, and some of them regulated square footage of the facility. Next slide, please. So just a quick recap of some of the proposed changes we have here. First off, we do plan on expanding the districts where the use is allowed by adding it as a limited use within the commercial mixed use district. And then in addition to this, we are also proposing to remove the provision that prevents off-site distribution of beer, wine, or spirits, primarily because we are adding this distribution cap. So taking that number from the Peer City research, it's less than 15,000 beer or cider barrels and 75,000 US gallons of wine or spirit a year. So adding that distribution cap, as well as requiring breweries to include an incidental public use such as a tasting room, a restaurant, or retail use. Next slide, please. So here is a brief summary of some of the impacts we have highlighted. obviously, the expansion of the use into commercial mixed use, that district would have the potential for noise and traffic impacts, as well as the increased proximity to residential uses. Staff believes that the inclusion of the use standards limiting production and requiring the accessory public use, such as a retail and restaurant use, would ensure compatibility with surrounding neighborhoods and help reduce the undesirable effects associated with manufacturing operations. And in addition, there are existing UDO regulations applicable within the CX district, which would mitigate the aesthetic concerns associated with outdoor storage. Next slide, please. And here's a quick map showing some of the zoning districts. In purple, you can see the heavy industrial and mixed-use industrial zoning districts shown in purple. And then in the light red color, as well as the darker red color, you can see the commercial mixed-use zoning district and downtown zoning district. So the light red color indicates the zoning district where we have proposed the expansion of this use. And next slide, please. I believe that is it. Questions?
Thank you. I believe the applicant is here. The applicant and those in support have a total of 10 minutes to speak.
Good morning, Mac Paul, Morningstar Law Group, 421 Fayetteville Street. Just want to provide a little bit of background and context about where this text change came from. In the last year or so, the Planning Commission has heard several cases in formerly IX areas, kind of near the downtown, that are rapidly urbanizing, particularly like Atlantic Avenue corridor, Wake Forest Road corridor, Midtown, south of downtown. And we do have some breweries in these IX areas. Most of them are constellated around 5 Points and pretty close proximity to older residential communities. As these IX areas are becoming more desirable for multifamily and office, in fact, one of them has an existing brewery. Some of the owners realized with the change to CX from IX to accommodate this urbanizing growth, it no longer allowed breweries under the UDO. And obviously breweries are becoming very popular. They're part of the city's brand, economic development, small businesses that are very active in our local community here. So we started looking at talking to the industry, looking at other peer cities. And in fact, saw recently in Cary back in 2018, they went through a similar conversation. Their breweries were not a defined use. They were essentially light manufacturing, so limited to industrial areas. So they went through a text change and essentially opened up as a separate use that would be permitted in commercial areas when they did have a restaurant or a tasting room. Cary has about 3 breweries right now. And it seems like other places have done that. So, started a conversation with staff. They've done a pretty thorough job of vetting this. The CX districts are primarily, as you saw on the map, commercial corridors. There are real workhorse for shopping centers, grocery anchored shopping centers in Raleigh, heavy retail use with, buffering, but also available for a fairly wide market area. And with a retail component, feel it's certainly appropriate in those districts, would take pressure off the limited IX districts that we have left and no longer prohibit them when an IX area converted over to like a walkable, or prohibit them when an IX area converted over to like a walkable, urban area. So respectfully ask for your support for this and happy to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you, Mr. Paul. There's no one signed up to speak on this item, so I'd like to allow for questions and comments from commissioners. Do any members have any questions or comments? Commissioner Bennett?
I just have a quick comment. I seem to recall a case not too long ago near downtown that we heard that was a request to change from, I think it might have been residential mixed use to industrial mixed use to allow for a brewery. And one of my concerns with that was going to industrial and what might happen long-term with the change to industrial. So I like this because I would be more comfortable with the change, particularly in a residential area, to commercial mixed use rather than industrial mixed use. So if I'm understanding it right, then I would favor this. And I like good wine, so I'm always looking for a new place for wine tastings. So.
Thank you for your comments. I concur. Do any additional commissioners have any questions or comments? Seeing none, I would like to entertain a motion. Commissioner Rains?
See if I can get it started here. For text change case TC 1421, I move to adopt the proposed consistency statement dated November 9th, 2021, contained in the agenda materials, and to recommend approval of the zoning text amendment. The action is taken as reasonable and in the public interest because the text change would better align the brewery, winery, distillery, and cidery use with the types of uses typically found in commercial and retail areas, and clarifies and improves existing use standards applicable to the DX and CX districts.
Thank you, Commissioner Rains. And do we have a second? Commissioner Mann?
Second.
Commissioner Rains has offered a motion to approve TC 1421, and Vice Chair Mann has offered a second. Is there any additional discussion or debate on the merits of the motion? Seeing none, I will ask Shanita for a roll call of members. At the end of the roll call, I will announce the outcome of the vote.
Commissioner Bennett, how do you vote?
Aye.
Commissioner Dartell?
Aye.
Commissioner Elder?
Aye.
Chair Fox?
Aye.
Commissioner Godinez?
Aye.
Commissioner Lampman?
Aye.
Vice Chair Mann?
Aye.
Commissioner Rains?
Aye.
The motion passes unanimously.
Thank you.
Okay. That concludes all of the discussion items on our agenda today. Next is approval of the minutes. The draft minutes for the October 26th virtual meeting are included in the backup. I'd like to recommend an edit to the discussion item of Z6820 in the depiction of the vote, changing that from the vote is unanimous to the vote is not unanimous. And then I'd need to verify the nay votes for that case. As a reminder, that was Z6820 on Hillsborough Street. I believe Commissioner Rains, from my notes, you were a nay vote. And one of the Bryans was a nay vote. I don't know if that was Commissioner Dattell or that was Commissioner O'Haver.
It was O'Haver.
Perfect. Are there any additional edits recommended to the minutes? Commissioner Bennett?
Yes, thank you, Chair Fox. For Z3921 Whitfield Road, could we just add the reason for my nay vote? And that was because I wasn't comfortable with the wording of the condition and not sure that it truly protected the cemetery.
Thank you. With those two edits, do we have any additional? Great. So including those two edits, I'd like to make a motion to approve the meeting minutes from the October 26th virtual meeting. Do I have a second? Commissioner Bennett?
Second.
And now I'll ask for a show of hands to record individual votes. Those in support of approving the minutes? Any opposed? Great, that motion passes unanimously. Moving on to report of the chairperson. You've probably started to receive invitations, actual meeting invitations for upcoming meetings. Thank you, Mr. Crane and staff for coordinating that. I know scheduling becomes difficult around this time of year, so I'm going to ask that everyone let us know as soon as possible when they need to be excused from an upcoming meeting. And then I'm going to pitch to report of the members, starting with Commissioner Godinez. Would you like to start by saying a few words?
Thank you so much for having me. And I am Irene Godinez and have been a Raleigh resident for about 19 years. I'm from Durham, so I didn't go too far. And I'm thrilled to be here and to learn and advocate on behalf of Raleigh residents to make sure that we're developing a city where all of our families can thrive and play. So thank you for having me.
Thank you, Commissioner Godinez. Do any other commissioners have a report? I might also ask for committee meeting schedules as they're coming up shortly. Commissioner Lampman?
Hi, everyone. So we have our next strategic planning committee meeting next week. So it's November 17th at 9 a.m. And so I believe that Irene, you are on that committee as well. So I think you may have received an email, and Roberta and Nicole. Did I miss anybody on that one? I think so. But yeah, I'm looking forward to that. I also, you may have a placeholder from Ira for December and January. So we have 3 months of planned discussion topics, which I'm excited about. I think they will be robust. I'm always open to suggestions as well for strategic planning committee, and I am happy to reach out. I have a couple of my own, so I'll kind of just take a poll and see what we all think. So thank you.
Excellent, thank you. Do any other commissioners have a report? I believe we have a committee of the whole meeting coming up on November 18 at 4. And I understand we may be trying to schedule a special meeting to make up for the meeting where we did not have a quorum. Travis, is there a report on that?
Ma'am, so we sent out a poll with selected dates and we could not get a consensus on any of the selected dates. So we're going to go regularly scheduled meeting for 18. However, I would note that likely have a very full agenda that meeting. And this meeting is normally a combined November and December meeting given the holiday schedule. So what staff might propose is that we look to an early December committee of the whole meeting, and we can send out another poll with some suggested dates on there for your consideration.
Excellent, thank you. And I will speak on behalf of Commissioner Miller, who is out. The next text change committee meeting will be on November 16 at 4 p.m. And is there any additional report from members? Oh, Commissioner Lampman.
I just have a general question. I wonder if the if we can just get a list of dates that we are meeting in November and December. I'm a little bit hazy. I think one of our last presentations said that our deadline for action was Christmas Day. So I think that we've got to make sure that we understand what our meeting agenda is like through the end of the year. Thanks.
Excellent, thank you. If we also look farther down in the board docs agenda items, there's a list of pending items, which lists out some of the upcoming meetings for the next, for the remainder of the month. Okay, next is a report of the Deputy Planning Director, Mr. Bowers.
Hi, thank you. Can everyone hear me?
Yes, sir, we can.
Great. First of all, want to extend my welcome to Commissioner Godinez. I would like to say that all of the meetings in this early and have so little public comment, but that would not be probably representative of the average meeting, but I'm glad you were able to ease into your new role with a meeting that ran very smoothly and is getting us out somewhat early today. My report is attached. I'm not going to go through every item on here, just a couple of things. There were 2 zoning cases that you reported out, C-2821 on Watkinstown Road and C-4021 Lewisburg Road, which will be back on the November 16th council meeting to have their public hearing scheduled. One did not have signed conditions in time, and the other one is proposing an additional condition prior to the public hearing. Your also Z6820, which was the case that had a split vote on Hillsborough Street and Bagwell Avenue, is going to do a round in the Safe, Vibrant, Healthy Communities Committee prior to the scheduling of the public hearing. One other final thing of note is that you have another text change coming to you soon, which will be TC 1221. This is a text change to allow accessory commercial uses in residential districts. And that concludes my report.
Thank you, Mr. Bowers. Is there anything else for the good of the order? Okay, seeing nothing, that concludes this meeting of the Planning Commission. Thank you, everybody, and have a great day.